Right, good afternoon, Greg, on a absolutely sunny day. First time it feels like this year. How's life down with you?
Spring has sprung. Yeah, but so have a few other things.
Yeah, it's been the news this week. I mean, we've been trying to push a bit of air power, more principled stuff, but actually the news is dominated by Iran and the massive military buildup going down there. And I was not sure where all this was going. Then you look at some of the numbers. You've been tweeting this week as well. And this is pretty big, isn't it? And this is, I mean, it seems to be the biggest since the Iraq War, the build-up. Why? It's probably just worth reminding us, taking it back. Why has Trump pulled the trigger on sending an enormous? He's called it an armada. I mean, initially you sort of thought maybe not, but there's a lot of stuff in the region now, and there's been a huge amount of air transport, movements, etc.
We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. My preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy. But one thing is certain, I will never allow the world's number one sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon.
Why is all this happening, and what is Trump seeking to achieve?
Yeah, let's see if I can cover that in a few minutes. I mean, you always ask me to get inside Donald Trump's head. It's always
I
slightly
know, I
nerve-wracking.
know.
So if you go back in time, I mean, let's go back quite a long way. I mean, Iran has been on the to-do list for a long time, not just for America, but for the whole of the Western world. It is not a nice country. It doesn't do nice things, and being nuclear equipped is a scenario that none of us really want to get to. And all our time in the Middle East, you've done it, I've done it. Yes, we were in wars in Iraq or wars against ISIS. The American eyes and ours, to a degree, were always on Iran. Iran was the number one threat in that region, always has been, and for now will continue to be. We've done a number of things over the years to try and get them to the table, to try and get them to not have a nuclear capability. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, I think it's called the JCPOA, was entered in 2015. Trump pulled out of it in 2018, either out of a fit because he didn't like Obama having been the originator. So the Americans have been out of the JCPOA for a while. Europe has sort of tried to hang on in there. And of course, we had the Midnight Hammer episode last year, very much off the back of an Israeli inspired action, which, according to Mr. Trump, obliterated Iran's nuclear capability. And now we find ourselves 7 months later with apparently Iran 1 week away from nuclear grade or industrial grade nuclear material. So why is Trump doing this? There is Israel are thick behind this. I don't think anyone can doubt that. So the relationship between Israel and US are probably front and center. Is Iran really that close? Did we do such little damage, or did they do such little damage 7 months ago, 8 months ago? Nobody really knows. And of course, it's classified information, so we're probably not going to find out. But America hasn't done a very good job of explaining this. And of course, they're in talks this week, or have been for the last few weeks. And those talks continue on Thursday this week. And we're all, waiting to see how they all turn out and what the actual truth is behind that.
Yeah, it's a useful backdrop, isn't it? Can I just pick apart a couple of things there, though? So, if you were an observer on the world stage at the moment, you'd go, Russia invaded Ukraine. If Ukraine had still got nuclear weapons, I mean, it was the third largest nuclear power in the world at the end of at the fall of the Soviet Union. 1994 Budapest Memo, give up your nuclear weapons in return for a cast iron guarantee of your sovereignty. That was America, the UK, and Russia. 20 years later, Russia rips up that bit of paper, and the rest is history. The so what is we've managed as nuclear powers ever since the Second World War to limit the spread of nuclear technology. But what's been demonstrated by Russia is if you don't have an ultimate weapon like that, you are vulnerable. If you're not one of the big dogs, there's only two or three in the world, then everybody else is on the table, on the menu. And I do wonder, therefore, yes, for all sorts of reasons, as you say, linked to Israel, that America can't countenance Iran getting a nuclear weapon. But I wonder whether we're going to see more of this around the world, because the number one priority of any nation is to defend itself. And ultimately, nuclear weapons is probably the only way you can defend yourself in the modern age.
Yeah, absolutely right. And even some European nations are now asking that very question of themselves on the basis that they're worried that the American nuclear backstop is no longer, 100% guaranteed or dependable. Somebody wrote the other day, and it's absolutely true, is Iran's nuclear capability is one flight away from China. If China decides to give it one, or Russia, North Korea, pick somebody, then Iran would have. Now, it's not going to be anything like the same level of scale as America, clearly, but one nuke is one nuke too many. And the threat of having it means your options then to do anything else militarily with it fade very quickly. We need to mention, of course, and I should have mentioned at the beginning, is there's another backdrop to this, of course, which is the protests going on in Iran. And Trump has been saying things like, yeah, keep going, lads. We'll be right there in a minute. And of course, he's not yet there, although he could be looking like he is. So there might be another angle to this. It's not just nuclear, but at the moment, all the rhetoric and all the language is very much linked to the nuclear talks. But there is another side story to this, which is the potential overthrow of the regime, either from within with a little bit of help from without.
I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but what I'd also like to do, though, is get your take on the legalities of this. And it crops up because
Yeah.
earlier on this week there was talk about Starmer and assisting. Have you seen evidence? Has Trump yet put his case as to why there's legal justification under international law? I know he doesn't really subscribe to that, but has that actually case been made yet?
The answer to that is no, and I base that on the fact that he didn't mention it in the State of the Union address yesterday that he gave, and when he had a pre-meet with the various members of the House prior to that, a lot of the Democrats came out and saying, this is serious, we still haven't seen a justification for all this activity and what may or may not happen. There are basically three reasons you can go to war. You and I have lived this throughout our entire military career. The first is the UN Security Council decides that something has got so awful that they're going to intervene on the back of a resolution, and a coalition under UN auspices has a fight. We've been there, we've done it, and there are a number of occasions. Libya, Iraq are the obvious ones. Article 5 obviously is a self-defense mechanism in NATO, but self-defense is an inherent right across the world, and it doesn't have to be in the NATO context. And Article 51 in the UN Charter gives anybody the inherent right to self or collective self-defense of an armed attack. Now, let's just knock those two off. We have not had the UN Security Council say, enough with Iran, we're declaring war on you, everybody pile in. So that's not happened. Article 51, you can only declare if you're under an armed attack. Well, at the moment, and this is where the grey zone comes in, is America currently under an armed attack from Iran? Strictly speaking, you could say no. Now, there's all sorts of nonsense going on with the Houthis, third parties in the Lebanon, etc. But an armed attack from Iran has not yet been proven. Now, America did use that reasoning for Midnight Hammer. And they're almost, you remember the film Minority Report with Tom Cruise, when you could commit a thought crime and be arrested before you'd done it? They argued that, they're going to get a nuke in a minute, so they're going to attack us with it. Therefore, we can attack them now before they get one. It's pretty legally dubious. I think America got away with it last time, partly because of all the other nonsense that was going on. Israel were doing their thing. Clearly, Iran was attacking Israel. There was no doubt about that, with thousands of missiles coming across. And America really came in on the back of that and saw the opportunity to take out the nuclear sites. But to go in now, preemptive, it's not clear that would be legally supported. There's one third reason, and we've done it ourselves in Kosovo, and that is the humanitarian, need to act, because there's a genocide going on, and just something needs to be done. And you get involved in an internal matter. Now, you might be able to argue even that is occurring in Iran because of the protests and the number of people who've been killed. But none of that has been made. None of it's been presented. And it sounds like Congress hasn't heard it either. So there is now a doubt that there is a genuine legal case for a strike to take place, which is why many countries are currently either restricting or not giving permission to use their bases, airspace, refueling aircraft, etc.
Yeah, because it does raise an interesting philosophical question, doesn't it? We may not like Iran. We may not like what they stand for. We may not like the fact they're a regime. We may not like a whole load of things, and they cause mischief in the region. But to then say you're not allowed a certain weapon and we're going to proactively strike you if you do, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I just think it's a really interesting challenge. And as you say, first of all, to my knowledge, the case hasn't been made. Secondly, as you say, there are the axis of evil, we called them, didn't we? It wasn't just Iran, it was North Korea, it was Russia, maybe even China.
Yeah.
And actually, just because America decides that Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon, if China or Russia decides they could have a nuclear weapon because it suits their aims, all of a sudden we get into a very, very dangerous and unstable world. And I think it's inevitable that in the State of the Union address, you mentioned President Trump. He did talk about the fact that I hope they negotiate, but the bottom line is they can't have the bomb. And it almost sounded like Netanyahu saying that, because if they were to get the bomb, it's an existential threat to Israel. The challenge, of course, is also Israel was nibbling away, going, it's not just about the nuclear weapon, it's how you deliver it. Therefore, it's ballistic missiles. And the one thing that Iran has in spades is a massive portfolio of ballistic missiles. And that's something else that it looks like America is being coaxed into getting involved. But the reason I nagged you about the legality is it was interesting. I wanted your take on Keir Starmer coming under a bit of criticism that he had, well, the press said he had banned America from using Fairford. I'm not sure whether that's true or whether he just hadn't given approval, because clearly you give approval if the case was made, and that's very different from saying no. But Diego Garcia and Fairford, what's your take that he's been less than forthcoming?
So there's a very public way to do this. You end up in the UN Security Council. There's a vote as to whether you act, and the Brits were to, heaven forbid, vote against it or abstain or even veto. That hasn't happened. So we haven't had a public falling out over this. And I think America is probably not minded to bring it to the Security Council. I think it will just do its own thing and make its own legal case. Trump may take it to his board of peace, which, and I don't know if anyone else has picked this up. I keep saying it on Twitter, but nobody else buys into this. Every base that America is currently using is from a country on the board of peace. So there is a Venn diagram out there that absolutely matches up. America could have asked us quietly, as diplomats do, and Yvette Cooper met with Marco Rubio just the other day, and behind closed doors, Marco Rubio said, "Hey, Yvette, we might want to launch strikes. What's your view on the use of?" And Yvette Cooper might have said, "We really wouldn't. We'd rather you didn't ask." And that's as far as it's gone. Now, is that a refusal? Well, it clearly is a refusal, but it's not a refusal because you haven't actually asked the question. But of course, that is a diplomatic world that used to exist. We're now in a diplomatic world where Trump asks on Twitter, and we're expected to reply. So yeah, and by all means, bring the Chagos Islands into this because of the importance of Diego Garcia. It's somewhat irrelevant in this question. If the UK is going to not allow America to strike, it will be from Fairford and Diego Garcia. We won't say, yeah, you can strike from that one, but not this one. I'm of the view that diplomatically, we've made it known that we're unlikely to give permission, as opposed to we've been asked and we said no.
I always think it was interesting because I was certainly asked a few times on the media this week because one of the Scottish MPs had criticised Keir Starmer and said, we need to be in bed with America, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And they said, what do you think? And I said, well, okay, two things. One of which is international law doesn't discriminate between the nation conducting the action and a nation supporting them if the supporting nation knows what that support is inclined to do. So if it's an illegal act, we would be just as culpable as America would be. And the second reason was this is, again, feels like America's war. And last I saw, the ballistic missiles that Iran has will reach the UK. They don't reach America. And the harsh reality, as you and I have discussed previously, is that the UK doesn't have the most credible missile defense system in the world. In fact, we are completely vulnerable. So who on earth in their right mind would sanction we would be part of a military action against Iran, giving them carte blanche to launch a couple of missiles at us just out of frustration, which we would not be able to protect ourselves about. It does seem to me a pretty clear case why the UK couldn't, at the moment, be involved in this.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of factors here. I'd like to believe that if we genuinely thought this was a strong legal and right moral thing to do, we would get involved and we'd just have to ride whatever collateral damage came our way. It would clearly be part of that decision-making process. I think this is Keir Starmer. You know, he's a lawyer. Let's be honest. Is sticking to his legal guns here, as are most other nations. We're not alone here. Most other nations are not allowing permissions. As I said, look on the Board of Peace flag map to see who does. This is a very, not a grey area, but it's an area that people get misunderstood. So if you make an F-35 part 10 years ago and it's now on an F-35, are we enabling an F-35 to strike Iran today because we made a part 5 years ago? Which is some of the argument people put in for Gaza, for example. And the legal argument is no, you exported that particular product to a country you trusted to follow the norms of international law. And the fact that they may change their mind subsequently, that's a different conversation. Can you give air-to-air refueling to them on their way to the target? No, you've enabled them. Can you give them basing, which they launch and then launch a strike, as opposed to go via a middle airfield? No. And can you let them use your airspace to access? No, if it's not legal. So that's where we find ourselves. It's why you've now got American aircraft pushing forward to the east, to Israel, to Jordan, to Bulgaria, to Turkey, who are all, shall we say, friendly nations to Donald Trump's plan, which, of course, for America, it's good news because they're closer. Therefore, they can up the tempo of the operation. It's bad news that they're now closer to the Iranian missiles, as you rightly point out. Maybe we'll talk about that in a minute, of what the threats might be.
So, given this massive build-up, then there's away from two of the biggest aircraft carriers, you've got the Gerald Ford out there. Although I understand it's in port at the moment, some problem with the toilet systems. But let's leave that. I don't want to take the mickey out of the most powerful aircraft carrier in the world.
Damn. Okay.
I know you might like to, but it's probably not prudent. The Abe Lincoln is also around there, and there's a lot of obviously ships and support and stuff like that. But actually, in a way, that's a distraction because there's also been a mass movement of other air assets into the region, hasn't there? Why is that the case, particularly air-to-air refueling? One of the people asked me the other day about why tankers. Why are they important in this?
So, I mean, some aeroplanes these days can go a lot further with their own internal gas. B-2, B-21 are the obvious ones. And they, in theory, and have done in Midnight Hammer, launched from the continental US and then landed back there after a long 24-hour mission. The problem is that means you've only dropped the bombs once in 24 hours. If you're going to do a protracted, literally a blitz campaign, a shock and awe, if you will, to bring the Iranian regime to its senses or its knees, depending on which strategy you're pursuing, you want to keep that pressure up almost continuously. And you're going to need aircraft to be on patrol for hours in order to provide the surveillance, the protection, etc. So move your aircraft closer. That obviously reduces the range. And then have as many tankers as you can, keeping that fight going and sustaining it and generating as many sorts or as many hours in the air as you possibly can, which is why tankers are so critical in the way that America now fights. Because aircraft like F-35s, even F-22s, are not going to fly to Jordan and spend very long over Iran without having to go back and get some gas unless it's got a tanker. Because if you want to do an 8-10 hour mission, then it's going to need to be fueled by those tankers.
Yeah, no, I've got a good example of that sort of tempo was that in Afghanistan, we were based, the Harrier Force were based at Kandahar. And if you remember back in the early days of us deployed to that airfield, it was a former Soviet Union base. And only 1,000-foot runway was actually available because the rest of it was just breaking up. Now you want to be as close as possible to the fight. So when our guys ask for help, you can get airborne and there quickly and rotate quickly, rearm, refuel. And we were the only jets that could operate there. Most of them other had to operate from hundreds of miles back, which means the tempo is inevitably a lot shorter. That's one of the, I think, the critical advantages of having the carrier group nearby, because you've got your own autonomy, you're not having to ask for permission, and you can mount a pretty high tempo. But the other question then ends up being, well, yeah, but do you have the weapons and the missiles? Because it won't be beyond the wit of man to say a lot of this stuff is being diverted to Ukraine at the moment, and protection. You know, do you think that's going to become an issue if Donald Trump really wants to do a high tempo operation into Iran?
I think it's already an issue, and we've seen it sneak into the news, haven't we? We've seen allegedly Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who, if we remember, was parachuted in from outside the normal pecking order, because Trump liked the cut of his jib. Now, whether it's him that's done it, whether the Pentagon's done it, whether somebody's done it, they're trying to send a message either to Trump or to the rest of the world that, look, don't do something stupid here. If you think you can do a quick midnight hammer, 10 days, 12 days, and then just stop, and Iran will go, oh, okay, we give in. I think that's what they're trying to tell him, is that A, that might not work, and B, if you want to do something more than that and go hard, then we've not got enough weapon stocks in theatre. Because that's, I think, the big difference between something like our Afghan and Iraq mission of the sort of counterinsurgency days. You could go up for a 5-6 hour mission, and you might only expend one of your 6 weapons in that 6-hour trip. We're talking about going to a target and dropping all your ordnance and coming back again and reloading and going back and keep doing that. So you're talking about a much, much higher rate of usage of weapons. And it is looking to be quite clear that the Americans don't have the weapons in theatre to do a sustained attack. And we've seen that from Donald Trump, who now appears to have said, look, I might do a short surgical strike just to show you what I'm capable of, and I will come back later for a bigger one. What he means is, it's going to take me a long time to get enough weapons in to do this properly. So he sort of declared his hand.
Yeah, but the C-17, the C-5s, the C-130s, there's been loads of those going in. But I guess they've also been taking in air defense systems, haven't they? Because a lot of the regional bases now need to have their air defenses bolstered as well.
Well, I think that's a key point. I think a lot of these weapon issues will be the defensive weapons, the SM-3s, 2s, whatever's, to protect the ships, to protect the bases, and the populations that are going to be sheltering underneath this umbrella. But I think, Sean, you raise the most important point. The cupboard might be bare. And the reason the cupboard might be bare is we've been firing a lot of these over the last few years, A, by giving them to Israel or helping Israel take care of some of its attacks, but also to Ukraine. Now, I know America doesn't give things to Ukraine anymore, but Europe pays for them and they get given to Ukraine. So, and you can't make these things quickly. So I think what we see here is the American cupboards has already been emptied out. And you've also got a problem that all these ships and aircraft have spent the last 6 months bobbing around the Caribbean, threatening Venezuela. And the reason, and I know I won't make a joke about the Gerald Ford, but that is a ship that's now on its second rotation into the Middle East. I think it's nearly done 9 months, and they've got people now who, bless them, left their partner just pregnant because they managed to get them pregnant just before they left, and they're missing the births. Yeah, it is. It is proving quite dire, and the American might is starting to show some cracks.
No wonder the toilets are full if they've been out for that long. But so that's the weapons thing. So let's go on to the targets, because it's all very well having all of this force posturing. It seems unlikely that the American plan would put boots on the ground. Iran has a very big, probably very passionate land force, not very credible, but the last thing America would want to do is get involved in a war on the ground. So it's going to be air attacks against targets. What sort of targets do you think? Because obviously the obvious one is obviously the uranium enrichment stuff. Yeah. But as you said, I thought that was all destroyed. If you're looking at trying to undermine the leadership, then you're probably going to go after some military targets. But what else is out there, do you think?
So you've got to be a bit careful here. I mean, you and I have been quite close to the plans in the past, so we know some of this, unless it's changed. I've also played Iran in at least 2 American classified war games, so I know how to fight as an Iranian, and I know how not to fight if you don't want to lose badly. You're right. America is not going to put boots on the ground. The reason they're not going to put boots on the ground is they haven't sent any boots. They have sent a naval air armada and it's a bit like a boxer, isn't it? We've decided to go and fight a heavyweight by jabbing. We're going to jab and keep jabbing because we do not want to get in a slugfest. We do not want to get close. We don't want to start, exchanging body blows. So what is that jabbing going to look like? Well, it depends on what your intention is. If it is, again, to take out more of his nuclear capability, which, if we remind ourselves, was obliterated 8 months ago, then it could be extremely surgical. Now, if there are targets out there that meet that criteria, fine. And if we've got the intelligence to pursue them and it's not buried, thousands of feet under whatever, and Iran will have learnt its lesson, presumably this stuff will be dispersed and hidden and goodness knows all over the place. But that is one limited way of, if you like, sticking to the rules of this is all about the nukes. If it was about further than that, if it was about regime change, although we always avoid using that word, but if it was aimed at that, then you're going to have to do a few things. You are clearly going to target the regime. Once you start targeting the regime, that becomes an existential threat to them. And, you thought you were in a boxing match, but now the gloves come off. And now you're in a street fight. And all rules go out the window. And third-party proxies, sabotage, you name it, everything would be done. And whilst you might not send boots on the ground, the boots might come to you. And we've seen the IRGC starting to appear in numbers on the Iraqi border. It's not a long drive from there to get down to some of those bases in the Middle East. You've seen ballistic missiles being moved to the south sort of coast because they're closer. And I think this is what America has to balance now. If it decides to do this and it almost banks on Iran responding, then the first target set has got to be all those means of responding. So the IRGC massing, the various ships that they've got, these drones, the ballistic missiles, because if Iran decides to react by punching first, then America's got a problem. And it's going to have to take away all of its ability to strike back before it can begin a long, slow, protracted campaign of basically bring the regime to its knees. And maybe, the Iranian people then become your boots on the ground who effectively take the country over, and then we see where we end up.
I wonder what's, the uranium enrichment stuff, as you say, might be challenging, but there's also widespread reports that Netanyahu, who's done more visits to the White House than any other leader, was saying these ballistic missiles is also, because there's lots of productions, launch sites and stuff like that. That's probably quite a target-rich environment for, because as you and I both know, gaining intelligence in these areas, it's largely sand and buildings. It's quite difficult to hide stuff unless it's deep underground. Therefore, there's probably a very good master target list. And it would seem to be that, therefore, the ballistic missile program and the uranium enrichment would be something that would satisfy Netanyahu. Probably Trump would be able to justify in his head legally. But it segues quite nicely on, because we've danced around this a bit. You're now Trump. What is your objective? Is it regime change? We haven't done that well in the past. Is it to stop the nuclear program? Is it to degrade the ballistic program? Is it to force Iran to negotiate? What is your objective?
So there you go. You want me to get inside Trump's head? This is what I think might be going on in his head. Trump wants to be a success at the midterms. Those midterms, the success of them will be based on him not getting involved in a forever war where there are American casualties. That cannot happen for him. This is the president that boasts about he stops wars. He doesn't start them, although he has bombed 8 countries in the time that he has been president. So that's his objective here. If he can achieve Iranian capitulation on their nuclear program through negotiation, or a very limited surgical strike like Midnight Hammer 2, then he might countenance that if he thinks he can get away with it. And let's just put a few facts out here. we all think, in fact, we almost know that on Midnight Hammer, Iran responded in order to save face, but declared its targets, limited the number of missiles it sent, telegraphed the whole thing in order to make sure that America didn't overreact and they weren't seen to it. So in other words, it was almost stage managed. So we could see another stage management here that allows Iran to keep what it thinks it can get away with and allows Trump to back away from what has been, let's be honest, a huge buildup, as we said right at the beginning, and has enough from those talks to be able to say, yeah, I have as ever, Donald Trump, have got Iran to back down and I've achieved success. I'm just going to remind you of one story that I cannot get rid of. If you remember, Tulsi Gabbard, the National Security Advisor, was, and still is, I understand, under, not investigation, but is certainly under questioning over keeping an intelligence report from Congress. And the intelligence report was two individuals from a foreign state, it doesn't say what state they are, talking about Iran. This was prior to Midnight Hammer, and it mentioned an individual close to the president, which has now been revealed to be Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner, obviously, is a son-in-law and is one of the two individuals currently negotiating with Iran alongside that diplomatic genius, Steve Witkoff. So I am, I'm afraid, fiercely on the side of conspiracy theory here. Trump can control the talks because he's got his people on the inside. It's not your traditional diplomatic process. He's got his insiders negotiating almost in private. I think Trump will look for a way out of this that doesn't get him involved in a war and gets him enough concessions from Iran that he can declare victory.
Surely, I'm sort of with you on this, but Iran, I think, games these stuff regularly. They always have fiery rhetoric, hell and damnation, have pictures of American blood flowing in rivers, you know, if you come in and attack us. And they will be well aware of the midterms. They'll be well aware that Trump probably wants to back off this. And therefore, it puts them in a relatively strong situation. And therefore, in a way, it turns the tables completely, that the world's most dominant superpower probably has more to lose than the Iranians do. Yep. And so Trump's almost put himself in, if he bluffs and he doesn't want to use it, he goes back with his tail between his legs and Iran is emboldened. Or Trump gets involved and Iran sucks it up, because if it's a short, sharp strike, it probably isn't going to achieve its aim of getting Iran to negotiate. If it's pummeling Iran and its people start to rise up, then the regime suddenly looks threatened. And I think that's when they would go, right, stop, you know, because their number one priority is to keep the regime going. But most of this gaming seems to put the advantage on Iran's hands rather than America.
Which is exactly where I think we are. And Donald Trump can talk about how much might he has and how much ability he has to prosecute this. We now know that's not necessarily true. We've heard that from a number of sources. I think even the Israelis the other day have started leaking that America has only got enough weapons to do like a Desert Fox. If you remember the Desert Fox, which is like a week-long strikes in Iraq. I think that is why we're not seeing a coherent argument from Trump or the White House, because it doesn't stand to scrutiny. You and I know that when we do military plans, and I was the UK's military planner for 3 years, you know, you do war game this. You look at the most likely response and the most dangerous response, and you weigh up all the potential risks and courses of action that an enemy can take against yours. And you're right, this could be anything from Iran just plays patsy, lets America disappear over the horizon, take all its stuff back, make the most pathetic of concessions, and get on with doing what they were doing anyway. In which case, you know, the world can breathe easy for a bit longer, and everything calms back down. Trump will declare victory, etc. The worst case scenario is Trump decides to act, and Iran won't know whether Trump is doing a quick and dirty surgical strike, unless Kushner's been up to his tricks again, or they're about to lose their regime and all their conventional capability. And I can tell you now that in that scenario, Iran has nothing to lose by firing them all right at the get-go. You do not sit there and watch America slowly but surely take you apart. What you do is you send hell and brimstone back the other way so that politically Trump is completely exposed and the whole thing falls apart. And that's the scenario nobody wants.
So let me just tease you about that, because I'm not sure. Would Iran genuinely want to kick the bear in the balls, knowing full well that it would hurt, but would basically unleash the wrath of the biggest superpower in the world? In other words, Operation Certain Death would ensue and the regime would be over.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, unless you think that Operation Certain Death has just started. In which case you go, right. And I think this is the problem. And I've seen this written in many places. If we think Iran thinks like us, boy, oh boy, have we got a mistake to make. And I think that is the great problem here. We're trying to put some sort of Western set of values and thinking and strategy here in an organization that doesn't think twice about using proxies, about funding terrorism. And we think it's going to play by the rules. And if that regime is threatened, we've known this with Russia, haven't we? So it's not just Iran. We know that if we begin to look like an existential threat to Russia, if we ever been end up in conflict, then nuclear war is a heartbeat away. Now, that's not the case in Iran. Iran has only got other means. But if Iran knows that the only way it might win that sort of the worst case scenario is by creating so much political difficulty and pressure on Trump, then why wouldn't you do that, as opposed to just watching yourself slowly be pulled apart?
Again, particularly because for some of the listeners, you and I have, as you say, we've war gamed this, we've been there, we've watched some of, but actually there are a couple of commentators out there that just say, look, Iran is a minnow militarily compared to the US. The US, once it's flexed its muscles, Iran will be subjugated. And you go, that is not the case, because Iran actually isn't stupid. They know that the Americans have got superior military force, but if they're not prepared to put boots on the ground, there are lots of things that Iran can do to give America and the world a bloody nose. So their ballistic missile program, they can saturate the defenses of Al Udeid, and rather than give the warnings, as you said before, they can take them out. They can get those proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, to carry on. The Straits of Hormuz, which controls a lot of the oil, they did a live firing exercise across that. Literally, why would they do that right now? Just because it closes it down, just to demonstrate we can do that. And of course, in the past, they've talked about mining the Straits of Hormuz, and there's about 20-25% of the world's oil passes through there. So all of a sudden, spikes in oil. And they've also got this lovely, drone ship called Shahid Bagheera, I found. Yeah. That is packed full of these very dangerous drones and has been sailing quite close to the aircraft carriers, sort of going, well, okay, if we did, let's have a look at your aircraft carrier. You've got some really good close-in defense against single missiles. How many can you do at once? Is it 10, 20, 50? If I put 100 drones at your carrier, can I put your carrier at threat? So I think there's loads of things that Iran can do. They're not going to win a war.
Yeah,
but my goodness, can they make life uncomfortable?
I can't resist this, but right now in the Gerald Ford, I think all you need to do is throw a lit match in and it might go up. You're absolutely right. They don't need to win. They just need to create and shatter the illusion that America is the great war winner that will just turn things around. And you can do that very quickly. And the Board of Peace, blimey, that's going to collapse in a heartbeat, and especially if some of these cities in these countries then come under attack. Now, there's a whole different conversation you and I can have about the relationship between the Middle East countries and Iran. And I think deep down, they're all hoping that Trump is going to back off this, that this is the biggest bluff in poker history, and that Trump in the end gets Iran to fold. I know Trump likes the playing cards analogy. My gut feel is that's exactly what he wants to occur here. And it's all for show. The problem comes if Iran doesn't give him enough of a victory and we end up in a scenario where Trump has got to do something. Otherwise, he looks weak. This will be the ultimate taco, won't it? If he backs away from this one. Now, can he do another Venezuela? Could you send in a small group of brave people, pick up the Ayatollah, and so I do worry. Here's where I'm really quite nervous: is Trump now has a very stylistic view of how these operations work. He's had a couple of really good successes. There's no doubt Venezuela was the most bloodless coup we've ever seen, and Midnight Hammer was a hugely spectacularly impressive operation. Stand fast whether it did not obliterate things. Is that now his litmus test? Does he now think that he can do it a third time? And that's my worry. And Iran has got to have a long, hard think here about how hard it fights back. Because you're right, America could then throw the kitchen sink at it, except it now starts to look like the kitchen sink might not be as robust as it used to be.
Well, also, my sort of takeaway from all of this is that the number of times in the past that you and I were doing battle for funding against Army, Navy, why preeminent, and of late, air power, air and space power particularly, does seem to be the sort of first responder to some of these things. And there's no doubt at all, that's exactly what was used in Venezuela. That's exactly what was used in Midnight Hammer, and that's exactly what's going to be used again this time. But the words of some of my army colleagues are ringing in my ears. It's very temporary, and you're starting to see the limit with a massive country like Iran, with loads of targets, with a limitation on the number of weapons that you've got available, without having boots on the ground, without having a more concerted effect. It could be that you can't achieve your aims with air and space power alone. And I think that suddenly that game of bluff, I think the one thing that for me is that if Iran was subjected to a pretty significant attack, that would undermine its military capability and would probably embolden those who clearly see the regime as vulnerable. Whether that would be something, and how that balance would be tipped. My worry, though, of course, is we've been rubbish, whether it's Libya, whether it's been Iraq, doing regime change. We do the military act, but we don't do any of the political stuff to make it work. And I think Iran could be a complete basket case if that's genuinely what America's seeking to do.
That is absolutely true. I think there are some that argue, actually, no, because Iran does have a significant number of people who are ready for a change, and they would effect it themselves. Whether that's true or not, we'll have to, heaven forbid, see. You're absolutely right about air and naval power not being able to hold ground, which is the adage we're so used to. But when we have gone into hold ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's not worked out well there either. So let's not kid ourselves. So you're absolutely right to suggest that. I think there's a factor here that we haven't discussed, but it's absolutely in the background. And I'm sure the Pentagon are thinking this. It is air and naval power that is America's primary bastion against China. And China is also on the to-do list, or not well. We know that American commanders are talking about being prepared to fight China in the next year or two. If America was to expend all its ordnance against Iran over the next 6 months, it won't be able to do China. It will take them years to recover their weapon stocks. So, we know that America was pulling out of Europe because it didn't have the ability to do two theaters. It can't do Iran and China either. And that will be weighing very heavily. And I think why you are seeing some of this stuff leaking out the Pentagon, I think it's because of that. Not necessarily because they think Iran's a bad idea. We've been waiting to do that one for a long time. But if we do it in the way that Mr. Trump might be hoping, you're going to need to put China on the later list, and China might take advantage of that.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, and all this is going to play out in the next few days. And rather than just being an interested bystander, I think this will be one for the history books, because as we started out, Iran with a nuclear weapon creates a very different landscape. How do you stop it? Diplomacy hasn't worked over the years. Trump seems determined to use military might. Now that it actually comes to pass, what that means, and also how you do that in the context of everything else going on.
Yeah.
I wonder whether Iran will bluff this out, knowing full well that there's a lot of aces that it currently has, which it didn't expect to have. And I do wonder what that means for the future.
Yeah, and it doesn't help, of course, that people like you and me, but actually we're not the only ones. Everyone is talking about all the impurities in this plan. and Iran will be making their own conclusions and they're getting their own intelligence. And we know the Chinese are passing them information because it's in China's interest. I mean, you could argue it's in China's interests for America to use up all its munitions in Iran. But yeah, look, I have so many debates on Twitter. They're not always debates. They're sometimes full-blown arguments. But, with people who see the one-dimensional issue here. And the one-dimensional issue is Iran must not have a nuclear bomb and the Iranian people should be protected from the regime's horrors. Yep, violently agree. If only the world was so simple and if only the other consequences weren't so awful. And then sub-strategic consequences of potential mismatching with China, relations in the Middle East, the collapse of the UN and the world order, which I know a lot of people don't believe in, but it's done us all right for a few years. There are so many more things at play here. And those people, and I'm just going to make a defense here of the current government, those people using this as a stick to beat the government on are doing it to beat the government up. They are not thinking through what is actually going on. And if they were in power, they would definitely be thinking a lot more carefully about all of the consequences.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see how this plays out over the coming few days.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. But there could be some pretty nasty outcomes there.